Okay, hello everyone. My name is Lydie DUSSOL. I'm an archaeologist working in Mesoamerica on the interactions between pre-Columbian people and the environment. And I'm specialized in anthracology, namely the study of archaeological wood charcoal. I made my PhD thesis at the Université Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne that I defended in 2017. And then I went to the Université Côte d'Azur in Nice, in the south of France, for a postdoctoral position at the CEPAM laboratory of the French CNRS. Today, I'm very happy to present you a part of my research that focuses on fuel and fire in pre-Columbian agroforestry at the Maya site of Naachtun in the lowlands of Guatemala. Let's begin with some background information. Okay. There are three key dates to understand the relationship between people and environment in Mesoamerica. First, there is the domestication of maize in the early Holocene. Then there is a sedentarization from the 2nd millennium BC, which led to the development of the Maya civilization in the Yucatan Peninsula. And finally, at the end of the 1st millennium AD, there is a major crisis that resulted in the abandonment of the majority of Maya cities. This is what we call the Maya collapse. Several causes have been invoked to explain this phenomenon, but today most researchers agree on the hypothesis of an environmental collapse, either caused by too much forest clearance for agriculture or for the needs of fuel wood, or caused by severe and multi-decadal droughts, or both of the phenomena. I should point out, indeed, that Maya cities had massive needs of fuel wood for heating and cooking, but also for making lime, which was a major component of architecture. With this in mind, growing populations and increasing deforestation for agricultural intensification, as you can see in this restitution of the ancient city of Copan in Honduras, should have raised critical issues for Maya people. Yet these central questions have never been addressed by anthracology before. This is due mainly to the lack of specialists working in the neotropics, but also because of the landscape diversity of the region and of the very high biodiversity of tropical environments, which further complicates the identification of the charcoal. So as an anthracologist, my goal is to understand the impact of human activities on the woodlands during the late Holocene. And for this, I studied two particular activities. First, slash and burn agriculture, because in fact, fire was the first tool used by people to modify its environment. And second, the use and management of fuel wood. Besides, in order to trace the role of human in the evolution of the woodlands, it is also necessary to take into account the role of climate. These three aspects necessarily lead to investigate the retroactive adaptation of human people to environmental changes, whether human or climate driven. Since my PhD, I've worked on the classic period city of Naachtun, whose history spanned almost the entire 1st millennium AD. On the right, this is a digital reconstruction of the monumental core of the city at its population peak. The site is located in the extreme north of Guatemala, and it has been investigated since 2010 by an international team of archaeologists and geoarchaeologists of the French CNRS and the Université San Carlos of Guatemala. As part of this project, I reconstructed the fuel economy of the city during its whole history. To do this, I had to tailor the well-established methods of European anthracology to a tropical environment. So I began with the establishment of a comparative reference collection of Central American woods. And I also investigated the taphonomy of archaeological charcoal for tropical woods through experimental fires. Then I implemented a wide-ranging sampling of archaeological charcoal that was designed to obtain the largest covering of the city's occupation, both spatially and temporally. This in order to guarantee the representativity of the data. In this case, representativity does not mean exhaustivity, because this would be impossible to achieve in such highly biodiverse environments, but it rather means that the whole charcoal spectrum should provide the picture of the main components of the domestic fuel economy at the site and of their relative variations in time. For those who are not familiar with archaeological fieldworks or with archaeobotanical studies, just a quick word on the protocol of sampling and analysis of the charcoal. During the excavation, we take samples of soils, usually 10 to 20 liters, sometimes more, in all relevant archaeological layers, that is, in this case, occupation layers and domestic midden, which contain the remains of domestic activities. We use the flotation method to retrieve the light fraction, that is the one that contains the charcoal. Once dry, we separate the wood charcoal from the rest of organic materials, and then we observe each charcoal pieces under the microscope, and with comparison of anatomical structures of the wood, we identify the different taxa. You can see here some examples, including a hardwood and a softwood species, and a stem of a species probably of the bamboo family. Now the results and some general figure first. The entire anthropological sequence includes 3,026 charcoal pieces that come from 40 different archaeological layers from throughout the entire city. The samples cover the whole history of the city, that is to say, 8 centuries from the very end of the pre-classic period to the early post-classic period. This wide coverage was critical to guarantee the representativity and the reliability of the results. I showed that there were 2 phases of fuel wood use. During the first one, people exploited semi-open woodlands with both slow-growing trees and fast-growing pioneers. And this may be due to an agricultural system based on shifting slash and burn. But it can also reflect a different climate during this period that would have led to the development of lower and drier vegetation. Then, during the population peak and just before the political collapse of the city, we observe a relative standardization of the domestic fuels, which now focus on fruit-bearing trees. This may suggest an intensification of arboricultural practices or a making and use of charcoal fuel, which further allows the hypothesis of a remote supply of domestic fuel in a context of probable deforestation and wood shortage in the city's territory. The fact is, post-abandonment deposits of ritual nature yielded evidence of the regrowth of the initial forest soon after most inhabitants had left the city, which reinforces the idea that the landscape had been previously highly modified by humans. So in sum, the fuel economy provides insight that the people of Naachtun changed from an extensive agricultural system to an intensive one, and that this impacted the availability of fuel wood. But most intriguing, the fact that this change occurred only a few decades before the political crisis of the city, which was followed by the departure of most of the inhabitants. This led me to new questions. First, what was the nature of the initial agroforest system? Was it actual shifting slash and burn? When exactly did this change from one system to the other happen? Because in fact, there might have been a lapse of time between changes of agricultural practices and the necessity to implement new strategies of wood procurement. And finally, did agricultural intensification ultimately cause the crisis and the abandonment of the city? The question of the role of slash and burn in deforestation and of agricultural intensification in the failure of ancient Maya societies is not a new question. But in fact, it has been hardly validated since we lack comparative data to evidence the practice of slash and burn around Maya city. This is the issue I've been dealing with since my postdoc. My goal is to identify the traces of agricultural fires in ancient cultivated soils in order to reconstruct temporal patterns of agricultural intensification and extensification, and thus to understand their role in the development and decline of ancient Maya societies. So, with my colleagues, we built a modern baseline of the paleoanthropological signatures of slash and burn through the study of plots of land at different stages in the cultivation cycle. And this is a study we carried out in a contemporary town, the contemporary town of Naachtun in northern Guatemala. We used both charcoal fragments that are identifiable and inframillimetric charcoal particles that are not identifiable, but which can be counted to assess concentrations. Inframillimetric charcoal is normally analyzed in stratified lake and pit sediments to reconstruct paleofire history. So one of the goals of this pilot study was also to determine if these particles in soils can be a reliable proxy for identifying agricultural fires directly in ancient soils. We showed that with the combination of both materials, identifiable charcoals and inframillimetric soil charcoal, which reflect different types of fuels, either wood, leaves, herbs, or seeds, it is possible to assess the types of vegetation that have been burnt and the type of slash and burn practices, namely, for example, with short or long fallow periods. We are now testing this method in pre-Columbian context at the site of Naachtun. Different spaces that were probably cultivated are analyzed, such as the vacant spaces around human settlement, around houses on the upperlands, and raised fields in the lower wetlands. This is an ongoing research. The data still need to be properly analyzed and compared with radiocarbon dating, but I can already say that we found important variations in the charcoal concentrations depending on depth levels, which suggests that fire events are recorded and can be traced through this method. The results should come soon, and if this method is validated, it should provide new and important insights to better understand the effects of agricultural systems on both societies and environments in the tropics. Well, this is all for me today. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to receive your feedback at the conference. See you soon. Bye.